You know that feeling when you're sitting next to your husband and he feels a million miles away? Maybe you're in the same room or even on the same couch, and yet there's this invisible wall between you, and you can't quite figure out when it went up or why it's there. You replay conversations in your head and you think, did I say something? Did I do something? Is he mad at me? Or does he even want to be here? And the silence starts to feel less like peace and more like a verdict about your relationship. If that's where you are right now, I want you to take a breath because today we're talking about emotional distance in marriage, what it actually is, why it happens, and most importantly, what you as a wife can do about it. Not by needing to chase connection or demanding or asking for it, but by creating the conditions for it to come back naturally. Welcome to the Softening into Love podcast. I'm your host, relationship coach Laura Amador, and I'm so glad that you're here. So I love to open the podcast by sharing a little bit about how I'm softening into love in my own life and my own marriage lately in real time. So I have an 8-year-old daughter, and we've been reading together Anne of Green Gables. And we got to this scene near the beginning of the book that just stopped me cold. If you don't know the story, Anne is a little orphan girl who's absolutely over the moon to have been chosen to be adopted. And so she's so excited that she's finally going to have a home and a family, only to find out that it was all a big mistake, that actually they wanted a boy and not a girl. And so Marilla, the woman who was going to adopt her along with her brother Matthew, is driving her back in a horse and buggy to the orphanage. Can you imagine this poor girl, the devastation of the moment? And yet here's what Anne says in that moment to Marilla. She says, quote, I've made up my mind to enjoy this drive. It's been my experience that you can nearly always enjoy things if you make up your mind firmly that you will. Of course, you must make it up firmly. I'm not going to think about going back to the asylum while we're having our drive. I'm just going to think about the drive. So I read that and I had to put the book down for a moment because it's so true, isn't it? We always get to decide. As Viktor Frankl writes, we can't control what happens to us, but we always get to control how we respond. And this week was one of those weeks, let me tell you. A tree fell and completely flattened our shed in the backyard. It's been super windy this spring in New England. And so it's gone. It's just gone. And then a rock flew up and shattered our car window. And then my babysitter forgot about my book club meeting, which means that I missed the self-care that I was most looking forward to. And so I caught myself starting to tally up all the little things that were going wrong and letting that low grade frustration color things, including how present I was with my kids and with my husband and with my own life. And as I read Anne's words, and I really imagined this little girl, right, facing something so much harder than a flattened shed or a broken window, right, still choosing to enjoy the drive anyways. And so I made a decision that I was going to look for the good. The sound of my kids playing in the backyard, the baby bunny explosion that we've had. There's just hopping all around in the backyard. It's so cute. You know, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, which I'll never take for granted. My Saturday date nights with my husband, which I look forward to every week. And here's the lesson tucked inside of that. Our emotional state is contagious in our marriages and in our homes. And when we walk around quietly tallying disappointments, our husbands can feel it. And all the people around us can feel it, right? And they might not be able to name it, but they feel that slow hum of tension and of dissatisfaction and tend to pull away from that. Not because they don't love us, but because it might not feel as safe to come close than when you're seeing things in a positive light. So when we choose, like Anne did, to be present to all the wonderful things around us and to enjoy the drive no matter what, we become someone that our husbands want to come closer to. We create warmth around us instead of coldness, and connection has a real chance to breathe and grow. Okay, now before I get into today's topic, I have something to share because it just made my whole week. So I often get these beautiful, beautiful emails from people who are reading my blog or listening to the podcast or just reading my own emails and they reply back. And so I got the most beautiful email last week from a listener, and it actually sparked an idea for me. She shared some of her wins and she asked me a question, and I thought, this is exactly the type of emails that I just love getting. And so it just makes my day to connect with you, to hear a little bit about your story, And it's so good to know that what I'm sharing and creating makes a difference. So I just love receiving your emails. It really means so much to me. And I've heard from you that it's also helpful to know that you're not alone, right? To hear from the experiences of other women. And often there's the same questions pop up over and over, right? And so I've decided to experiment with making this a regular segment of the podcast because one of my absolute favorite things is to hear your wins and to celebrate them with you. And of course, what we focus on is what increases. So if you're focusing on your wins, you're actively creating more of them. So I'd love to, and I did get permission from her to share this. So thank you so much. So she had listened to last week's podcast on emotional safety, and she mentioned that she tried saying ouch the way I talked about there. Instead of getting defensive or shutting down when her husband said something that stung, she just simply said ouch. And she told me that her husband stopped and he actually paused and apologized and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean that. It just came out wrong." And she said that it was the first genuine, unprompted apology that she'd gotten from him, and she didn't even know how long. And here's the part that really got me. She said that he's been making fewer of those little critical comments since then. And she didn't need to go into a full blown lecture. She didn't need to explain to him why that hurt her feelings. And she certainly didn't withdraw or shut down. But because of that one small, soft, honest word, it created a moment of real understanding and connection. And he responded to it. And that's the power of softening, my friends. It doesn't look like weakness, it looks like connection. And so if you have a win that you want to share, please send it to me. Either leave it in the comments or I'm going to have a form linked in the description. And it could be something small, it could be something big. I want to hear it. And your story might be exactly what another wife needs to hear to feel hopeful or inspired. All right, so let's talk about distance, right? Emotional distance in a relationship. So a client came to me with a challenge that I hear all the time. She said to me that her husband had been distant for many, many months, and he'd come home and just start scrolling on his phone and give her one word answers and even go to sleep without really talking to her so that the day would draw to a close and there would have been no connection at all. And she said that it felt like they were just living parallel lives under the same roof, and she couldn't figure out what had happened to them. And she told me that she'd tried everything. She'd brought it up to him. She'd asked him what was wrong. She'd cried. She'd pulled back herself to see if he'd noticed, but nothing was working. And that silence between them was starting to feel permanent. And that was her fear. Fast forward 4 months, and her marriage is almost unrecognizable. Her husband initiates conversations and kisses now, and he reaches for her hand. And he told her recently that he feels like they're finally on the same team. And she told me that she feels like herself again, maybe for the first time in years. And so what changed here? It wasn't him, it was her. And the shifts that she made were small, they preserved her dignity, and they made her really be happy with the woman that she was. And so if you've been quietly thinking things like, why does my husband seem so distant? Or why does he feel like a stranger? Then this episode is for you. Because what worked for this wife might be exactly what you need to hear today. Now, when we're in pain, we tend to look for a moment, right? When did he change? When did we stop connecting? Was it after the kids? Was it after that argument we had last spring? Was it after that vacation that ended up going horribly? Was it after he got buried at his new job, right? But emotional distance in marriage rarely has a single starting point. It usually builds slowly and quietly in the moments that we often don't even notice or realize are the cause. And then the gap feels too wide to even imagine crossing, right? That's when things start to feel hopeless. And so I remember this season in my own marriage when my husband felt unreachable to me. He'd come home and go quiet, and I'd try to talk, and I'd just get one word answers, and I'd reach for closeness and feel rebuffed. And I told myself, he's just really stressed or just not a great communicator, right? All the things that we tell ourselves in order to try to make sense of the silence so that we can fix it, right? If I know the cause, then I can figure out how to fix it. But what I didn't see yet was my own role in the dynamic. Not because everything is one person's fault ever, right? It takes two people to tango. But I was definitely doing things that made connection harder without even knowing it, and things that felt completely justified at the time, right? Even loving in the moment, but were actually totally getting in the way of connection. So here's the truth that changed my marriage. And now I share it with the women that I coach because it's so important. His distance is almost always a response to something. And it's often a response to her, right? To the dynamic in the relationship, a response to the energy between you. It's not from a lack of love or unreconcilable differences, as so many people think, but because of certain patterns that make complete sense given how much you care, but that can actually quietly create an environment where he pulls back. So let's talk about some of the mistakes that many wives make that create more distance. It's things like bringing up issues frequently. And again, this is understandable, right? Because you want a solution and you want more closeness. And we're told that in order to fix something, we need to talk about it, right? But his experience of this is that he's being told that he's not good enough, right? That he's a failure or that he's a disappointment. Another mistake is over explaining and mistaking criticism for vulnerability. And again, this comes down to wanting to be understood, which is totally valid and important. But the words that we pick can make him go quiet and feed the distance between you. That doesn't mean that you have to keep all your feelings shut in or that you just have to settle for never having your emotional needs met. It doesn't mean that at all. What it does mean is that we want to be careful to not mistake criticism for vulnerability. Another mistake is trying to fix, manage, help, or guide him. And I know this can sound crazy because so many women think, well, that's what a good wife does, right? And you love him and you want things to go well and you want him to succeed. But it can feel to him like mistrust. And feeling mistrusted can be really devastating for connection. And another mistake is chasing connection when you feel him pulling away. And this makes total sense because you're probably scared of losing him and you probably miss him and miss the connection that you share. But that pursuit can actually increase the distance. And so I want to be really clear that all of these things make sense in the moment, right? They feel justified. They feel like they're going to make things better. And they're always coming from a good place. They're coming from the best of intentions, from a loving place. That means that you're a woman who loves her husband and just doesn't yet have a different set of tools in order to get the results you want. But here's the good news. Because you're influencing this dynamic, that means you also have the power to shift it. So let's talk about the one thing that can actually make distance worse. When we feel emotional distance, our instinct is to close the gap. So we reach more, we try to talk more, we ask more questions, we try harder, we get more anxious and more frustrated and more hurt. And that usually makes things worse, unfortunately. The more that we pursue, the more that he withdraws. It's one of the most painful paradoxes in marriage, and it's one that I've seen play out not only in my own relationship in the early days, but in the lives of so many of the women that I work with. So this is about understanding how emotional safety works in a marriage and how a man reconnects when he feels trusted, respected, and like he can succeed with you, like he can make you happy. When a wife is anxious and reaching and chasing connection, it signals to her husband, usually without her even realizing, it signals that he's failing her, that no matter what he does, it's not enough, and that the marriage is a place of pressure, not of peace. And so he goes quiet and checks out and buries himself in work or in his screens or anything that feels like relief. But here's the thing, it probably feels like he's abandoning you, but he's not abandoning you, he's escaping the pressure. And the moment that you understand that, things can shift because now you'll know what to do differently. So, what actually creates connection? The shifts can begin with you. The wives that I've seen make the most profound transformation in their marriages, from cold and distant to warm and close again, didn't do it by getting their husbands to change. They did it by coming back to themselves. And almost like magic, though it isn't magic at all, it's actually very predictable. When she changed, he responded because the emotional climate of the marriage shifted and the connection could finally breathe again. So I want to share 3 things that actually start to close the distance between you. The first is to take incredible care of yourself. And I mean genuinely asking yourself every single day, what would feel good today? What would make me truly, deeply happy and well rested? How can I love myself well today? And making that a non negotiable. And then doing that thing without guilt, without waiting for permission, without waiting for the to do list to be done, but really, truly making that the number one priority. And here's why this matters so much. When you're depleted, you're much more likely to be reactive. And it's so much easier for anxiety and frustration and resentment to take flight. Every silence feels like a rejection. Every distraction feels like an abandonment. And your nervous system is running on empty and interpreting everything through the lens of fear. And that fear shows up in ways that push him away even further, even when you're trying to connect. So when you start filling your cup with rest, joy, and the things that make you feel like you again, something can shift. It helps you feel less anxious and less needy for him to fix how you feel and less triggered by the distance. So you become someone that it feels really good to be around, not because you have to perform happiness, but because you're genuinely reconnected with yourself. And that is magnetic in a way that no amount of reaching or having big talks about the relationship or pursuing connection ever can be. The second piece is to make the conscious choice to trust him. And this means actually letting go. So if you've been carrying most of the mental and emotional load in your marriage, then this one might make you tense up a little bit. Because one of the ways that a husband disconnects is when he feels like he isn't needed or trusted in his own home. So, for example, if the wife manages the schedule, makes all the decisions, manages the budget, corrects his parenting approach, and steps in before he has a chance to figure things out, he gets the message without even having to say a word about it that she doesn't really trust him. And a man who doesn't feel trusted or respected or feels like he's unnecessary there is going to withdraw. Not from being petty, but just because it's deeply human. And so the next time he suggests something like where to eat or how to handle a situation with the kids or what route to take when there's traffic, instead of redirecting or improving on his idea, try saying whatever you think and then letting go completely. This isn't about pretending that you don't have opinions. It's about choosing your marriage over needing control or needing to be right. It's about giving him a moment to feel capable and trusted and to watch what that does to the energy between you. Many wives are stunned by how quickly this small act of trust can ripple outward. He'll likely stand a little taller, he'll be a little warmer, and move a little closer. Not because you told him what he needs to do, but because you finally gave him room to show up. And the third thing I'd like to share today is to let gratitude lead, even if this is before he's even earned it. So here's something I wish that someone had told me earlier. Criticism and concern often feels the same to us as women, as wives, but they can land very different on a husband. So when we bring up, for example, what he forgot when he went food shopping, or point out how he could have done something differently, or explain at length why we're frustrated, with the best intentions, he often only hears one thing: you are not good enough. You're failing. And a person who feels chronically criticized doesn't lean in, they pull back. They go somewhere emotionally safe, which is often away from the source of the feeling of being criticized, even when the criticism feels completely justified from where you're standing. So, this is where gratitude becomes one of the most powerful things that you can do. And I want to be super clear, this isn't about settling for the bare minimum or pretending that your needs don't matter. It's actually quite the opposite of that. When you start deliberately noticing what he does do and saying something out loud about that, you shine a light on the good. And what you shine a light on is always what grows. So, a simple thank you so much for going to food shopping today. I loved that I had the time to go for a walk. Or I really appreciated that you got the kids to bed tonight. You take such wonderful care of them, right? That does something to a man that no amount of hinting or hoping ever could. It tells him that he's seen and that he's enough and that this marriage is a place where he can win. And a man who feels like he can win at home, he shows up a lot more. He's warmer, he's more present, and he starts moving toward you instead of away. Not because you've managed him into it, but because you created the emotional climate where closeness can actually grow. When a husband feels genuinely appreciated by his wife and truly seen and valued, he leans in differently. The emotional distance between you can start to close not because you asked or demanded that from him, but because you gave him a reason to want that. All right, now let's get into the listener question from the email I mentioned earlier. And this is one that I think so many of you will recognize yourselves in, and really what led the topic for today. So she says, my husband and I have been married for 9 years. He's a good man and a good dad, and I know he loves me. But lately, I feel like we're just roommates. We talk about the kids and the schedule and the bills, but there's no real conversation or connection anymore. no laughing or depth. And I've tried bringing it up, and he just says everything is fine, but it doesn't feel fine to me. I feel like I'm grieving a connection that we used to have, and I don't even know how to talk to him about it without creating tension. What do I do? First of all, that sounds incredibly painful and lonely, and I'm so sorry that you find yourself in that position. Now, the tips that I just shared are definitely going to apply in your situation, but I'd like to add to that a place where you can start and really start to reset the energy between you and the tone of the relationship that's currently sounds like it's very disconnected and quiet and lonely, and you want to bring back the laughter and the depth and the connection. So, what influences the feel of a relationship, of a marriage, is often the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And so, in this situation, the story that might be replaying might sound something like, something is wrong with us, something is wrong with him, we're so disconnected, right? Something like that, that there's a problem. And if you're anything like me, that story might be influencing how you show up within the relationship as well. I hear that he's being distant and quiet, but I know for me, when I get it in my head that there's a problem, that belief will reflect in how I interact and how I respond. And so, for example, if I'm telling myself that he doesn't want to be here, then how will I show up? I'm going to show up probably tense and anxious and maybe a little on edge. And that is not conducive to connection either, right? Whereas if I tell myself I'm going to show up today as if my relationship was deeply connected and I felt fully safe to just be myself right now, then how would I show up? I would probably be laughing and having fun, and it would be that much easier to reconnect because I'd be setting a new tone. What I wish that every wife knew is this: distance in a marriage is rarely about love fading. It's usually so much more about emotional safety fading. When your husband feels like coming close to you means feeling judged or inadequate or like a disappointment, or that it might lead to conflict, he'll find reasons to stay on the edges of your relationship, not because he doesn't love you or want you, but because somewhere along the way, that closeness started to feel costly. That doesn't mean that it's all your fault. And it doesn't mean that your feelings and your needs are unjustified. They're valid. What it does mean is that there's a different way forward. So if you're anything like me and most of the women that I coach and speak to, you're probably anxiously trying to fix things and leading in because you don't feel safe either. And as wives, we're so powerful here, even when it doesn't feel like it. The emotional temperature of a relationship can be reset by just one person. When you soften, something between you can shift. Distance in a marriage is not a diagnosis, and it doesn't have to mean that you're doomed. It is a signal. And now that you've heard that signal, you can respond to it. So I'd love to invite you to a little experiment of your own this week in your relationship. And that's to just pick one of the three shifts that I mentioned today. Not all three at once, because that's just overwhelming, but just one, right? So if you're running on empty, start with yourself. Do one thing that genuinely fills your cup and brings you real, true joy and rest. Not because you have to earn it, but because you matter. And notice how differently you move and interact in your relationship when you're not completely depleted. If control has been your default lately, try the whatever you think experiment. The next time he offers an opinion or tries to make a decision, just let it land, right? Without needing to redirect or improve upon it. Just let him lead in something and see what it does to the air between you. And if criticism has been louder than appreciation lately, even if it's just been in your head, and it's so easy to slip into that when you're exhausted and hurting. But I invite you to just find one thing that he did, however small, and tell him that you noticed and mean it and see what happens. So that's it. Just choose one shift. The distance didn't build overnight, and it's not going to close overnight either. But it does close one small moment of turning towards each other at a time. Now, I would love to know what happened when you tried your experiment. Did something shift, even just a little? Come and share it with me, either in the comments or in that quick little form that's linked in the description. And next week, we're going to be talking about feeling unheard or misunderstood by your husband. So I want to hear from you. Any questions about that too? If there's something that you've tried that hasn't worked and why you think that is, or what questions you have about this topic. Also, you can drop it in the comments or reply to me in that same form. I read everything. Now, if today's episode resonated with you and you're thinking, I want more of this, then I have a free guide called 3 Steps to Reignite Connection, and you can grab that in the link in the description. It's a really great place to start. And if you're ready for something that goes much deeper and you'd like someone to personally guide you in your situation, I work with wives one-on-one through private coaching. So if you've been feeling like you need someone in your corner to hold your hand through this, who really gets it and that can guide you, that is in the description as well. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And until next time, keep softening into love.